Welcome to the Industry Experts panel at PortfolioWealthGlobal.com. My name is Michelle Holliday. Today, we are welcoming back to the show Mr. Mark O'Byrne. Mark is the founder and research director of Goldcore.com. The company is a global bullion dealer based in Ireland with clientele all over the world, including many American clients. Goldcore's expertise is the protection of wealth through the investment and safe global storage of precious metals. Mark's company serves clients from over 140 countries with sales of over $1 billion since it was created in 2003. Mark, welcome back to the show. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for having me back on with you.
We are thrilled to have you here, always thrilled to talk about gold, but we want to start off with the situation all around the world. We have the lockdowns, we have the craziness, and of course you are based in Dublin, Ireland. So I want to get your perspective of what is going on there.
Yeah, it's craziness here too. Craziness around the world, as you said. It's, we deal in gold bullion and we are very aware of all the risks around the world in terms of financial, economic, monetary risks, and we've even looked at the ecological risks around the world. And, if a super volcano goes off, what that could do to the environment, what that could do to crops, what that could do to the economy. But even us gold bullion dealers who tend to look at the potential risks that are out there in worst case scenarios, very few of us thought that a pandemic or a so-called pandemic would create this scale of economic shutdowns, the lockdowns, national lockdowns, in effect a global shutdown of our entire societies and economies, and the SMEs, what we call small, medium enterprises here in Ireland and in Europe, which are the very backbone of our economy. The small and medium-sized family businesses, bars, restaurants, tourism. There's an ecosystem that support all our economies and create huge employment and taxes that fund our health service and fund our vital services. So for these governments to shut down the economies as they have done around the world is absolutely unprecedented. It hasn't been done, I don't think, in the history of mankind. It's really economic illiterate, and I don't think the ramifications of this is going to create much more death and destruction and ill health to people in the medium and long term than the so-called virus itself, which increasingly the data has shown that the virus is not half as lethal as we're led to believe,
Exactly. That's an interesting situation that you have sort of the same perspective that a lot of people here have in the United States and all around the world. Germany, of course, just March, they have a massive push against wearing masks and just getting back out there and getting life back on course. You called this a so-called pandemic. You said a couple terms there that you doubt the situation. What are your personal feelings, Mark, as someone who lives in Dublin, Ireland, about how legitimate this has all been? You also use the term economic illiteracy, which I think is an excellent, hits the nail on the head at the moment.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm just shocked by it. I'm absolutely shocked every day I wake up and I'm like, is this some crazy dream, because it it doesn't make any sense, some of the things that happen in the world today, And in fairness, it's such a divisive issue because so many people, they actually believe in the so-called experts, the health experts, and these public health experts who are leading us by the nose to economic disaster, And I have to hasten that this is not the view of Goldcore per se, because, we're a company and we have different people with different views and different opinions, and the senior management and the owners of the company, everything. So this is not a Goldcore view per se. This is my own personal opinion, and I think it's important that we all give our own. It's because it's getting so crazy now that you can't actually voice your opinion, and people are being shamed and being censored, and they're having to censor themselves. I spoke to a neighbour on the doorstep today, and he was actually whispering to me about, I don't think these masks are a good idea. What do you think? He was actually scared to say it out loud, and because that's what's going on now. So you're an anti-masker, which is a bit like you're an anti-vaxxer, or rather than engaging, some people realize that masks have a place, but we don't think we should wear masks when we're out in the fresh air, maybe, or we think we should only wear masks for short periods of time if we're in a nursing home with vulnerable people, or if we're symptomatic, we should wear a mask. If we think we are vulnerable and we're going to infect other people, then yeah, absolutely, you should wear a mask. Or if you are a vulnerable person who's very scared that someone's going to sneeze and cough on you, then you should wear a mask. But to mandate masks for the entire society, including children, the consequences of that in terms of the psychological impacts are just unfathomable. It's because we're actually imposing a form of, it's like a Sharia thing. We're all going around with burqas on our face, and what is that going to do to our culture and our society in the medium long term? So I don't think any of the ramifications of this are being thought through. And talking about our economies and people losing there's a lot of research showing that the amount of when unemployment goes up by 1% of population, it leads to, I don't know the exact data, but it leads to a certain increase in the amount of depression in the society and the amount of suicide in society, And we're beginning to see data here in Ireland where there's a lot of suicides happening. And you're not hearing that in the news every single day. Instead, we hear about cases. It's like, so what cases went up? Of course the cases went up. We're testing more people. It's good that the cases have gone up, but the mortality hasn't gone up. The mortality has gone way down, but they're not even talking about that because the agenda is about this whole economic reset, and that's what's really going on here. Is there are huge agendas, and there's, I'd rather focus more on gold and silver and that side of things rather than get into the so-called conspiracies. But large corporations have their own agendas, and their primary agenda is about profit, as we all know, and they don't really care about the ramifications for the wider economy and society, and on families and small businesses. They care about profit. And big pharma has been quite ruthless over the years, and I think they're being quite ruthless today, So, but anyway, that's, again, my personal opinion, and I think a lot of people share that opinion when you actually voice it. People are actually scared to say it, because somehow that means that we don't care for the people who died from COVID, which is nothing could be further from the truth. But I care about all people in our society and all families and men, women, and children who are all going to be massively impacted by this, And we need to look at this holistically, the entire impact on our entire society, and indeed on our healthcare systems. How will we fund our healthcare systems in 1 year, in 3 years, and 5 years? So, there will be, I think, hundreds and thousands of times more deaths from the lockdowns and the masks and all this wider agenda of shutting down our economy than there is from the actual virus.
Right. And so many important points there, but probably the most important point is that people have become afraid to voice their own opinion, and therefore they kind of go along with what they think is the mass opinion, because that's the one that is prophesized basically by the media. When I say prophesized, it's almost like this is what you are going to think, and this is what you are going to agree with, and this is what you are going to talk about. You know what I mean? It's a
yeah. And if you don't, you're irresponsible. You're antisocial. You're putting people's lives at risk. It's outrageous that you cannot actually have a debate about these things, And let's talk about all the other lives that are at risk here, And I mean, I'm shocked at the media, because I don't. The media, I don't like bashing the media, whether it be CNN or Fox on the left wing, right wing, but at the end of the day, it's just a Punch and Judy show. It distracts away from the real issues, and we're not talking about the real issues because instead, we're being distracted by the cases, and basically they programmed us with fear. I think they have actually. It's like we don't have an immune system anymore. It's like, why not talk about going out into nature and having a walk, having some exercise, getting vitamin D from the sun? Why not empower people to actually protect their health and their family's health, rather than telling them that they're all going to die? Because there is a thing called the placebo. The pharmaceutical companies know about the placebo effect. and if we all think that we're going to die and the Black Death is going to kill us all, then, a lot of people live into that future. It is this sort of prophecy thing that people can live into, and that's what the media is doing right now. They're programming people with fear. I'm not saying it's intentional. I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. I think it's more ignorance rather than some arch conspiracy. But I think the conspiracy is a big profit for a lot of people, and fear sells. and they are selling fear in a huge way. And it's about ratings, ultimately. That's what it's about for CNN and Fox. They don't really care about people who die from COVID. And people like us, and you do care more about these people, but for us to voice these concerns, you're actually made out to be someone who doesn't care about these people. And all we care about is money. We're greedy people who care about business more than lives, which is total nonsense, you know. Anyway, it's good. It's good for us. We need to. I think, you know, I'm having my little rant here, and I think we all need to have a little rant and just not censor ourselves anymore. Just speak our hearts, speak our minds, and let's have a debate. Well, what is wrong with freedom of speech? And you know, these are principles that were our forefathers all and foremothers all fought for, was for us to be able to articulate ourselves, have freedom of speech, and have a bit of rational debate, and then we can make an informed decision.
Right, and we lose sight of the fact that we elect these politicians. They're not medical experts, they're not financial experts, they're not even experts at all in many cases, you know, and then they get into the political office and all of a sudden they're going to determine what's going to be happening to the mass population. And I think the real danger lies right there. Well,
absolutely. And even Fauci, you know, the guy who's spearheading this whole thing in the US, but globally people look to Fauci now, and you know, he has some vested interests in terms of business interests and all the rest, and no one's talking about that, you know. So, you know, it's, yeah, there's agendas there, and it's going to be very bad, unfortunately, very, very bad for economies and for, you know, the financial well-being of people around the world. But coming full circle, the people who own gold and silver, that will protect them, and they will, you know, manage to protect their wealth as they have done throughout history. When we see these economic depressions and currency crisis, ultimately we're going to end up in the dollar is, you know, and the euro and the pound. All these currencies are going to be massively devalued, and gold and silver will come into their own in terms of protecting people, families, companies, you know.
Right. You brought up 3 points right there, and those are going to be my next 3 questions. They're about the impact on the dollar from what's happening right now, the reset, and of course gold. I want to start off with the reset because you've mentioned that a couple times. And for those who aren't really familiar, you know, everyone hears about the reset, but Mark, what exactly is it? Could you please define the details of what we mean when we're talking about the reset that's coming?
Well, yeah, it's basically a return to some form of gold standard, whether it be a quasi gold standard with some form of partial backing of the currencies with gold, or indeed a full backing. And basically, we have, I alluded to there at the start, we have a massive global debt bubble, and the debt has just gone up astronomically in the last few months alone. I mean, governments are putting in, you know, I don't know what the numbers are, but I think you're talking 20, 30, 40, 50 trillion has been pumped into the economy in recent months, you know, in response to the government shutting down the economy. You know, the same people who shut down the economy are debasing our currencies and injecting trillions of dollars into the economy, you know, and US national debt alone has gone up trillions. So basically, there was going to be a currency crisis. People are going to lose faith in these currencies. They're realizing what's happened to their currencies. They're going to start buying tangible assets as a way to protect themselves, and they'll buy other assets as well, with stocks and whatever else. But I think tangible assets in particular will do well, and then the currencies will fall even more. So in order to maintain faith or recreate faith and confidence in currencies, they will move to reset the currencies vis-a-vis gold, and as I said, quasi are fully backed the currencies with gold. Probably partially back, I would think, because it'd be very hard to fully back them given the very limited amount of gold in the world, and the massive increase in the population we've seen in the last, you know, since 1945. So basically how it would happen is, you know, at some stage in the coming weeks or months, governments will come together. You will see the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1945 was a global monetary agreement. The governments would come together, and the central banks, indeed, the Federal Reserve, the Bank of China, ECB, the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan, the major central banks would come together, and they would say, right, people are losing faith in the currencies. We now need to peg our currencies to gold at $10,000 per ounce, 10,000 euros per ounce, 10,000 pounds per ounce, you know, probably 100,000 Japanese yen, or a much larger number for Japanese yen, because the Japanese yen is, you know, its value per ounce is much higher, because the Japanese have been basing their currencies for years. And I think they're going to be the first country with 1 quadrillion in debt. We used to talk about millions and millionaires. You were very rich, you were a millionaire, and then it was a billionaire. And now we talk about trillions, and soon we're going to be talking about quadrillions, and the Japanese are hitting the quadrillion level, you know. So I mean, all the currencies, the major currencies, would be pegged to gold. They would, say we've got this gold in our central bank that's backed the currencies, and they would use that as a way to try and reignite or re-engender confidence in the currencies. And whether it works or not is a different question. The jury is very much out on that. And if they keep continuing with the crazy economic illiteracy that's going on today, and unless there's a return to a belief in capitalism and allowing people to be creative and to go out and to work hard and to create businesses and to employ people, unless they actually believe in these fundamental principles of our society that we've all seen, we all agreed on for the last 40 or 50 years, then that people will not trust in these currencies, you know. So, but I think that will happen. I think people, you alluded to the fact that there was, 1 million people in Berlin. There's people protesting in London, here in Dublin, around the world. People are protesting against this, you know, and the media is barely covering it. And I've seen this personally, whereby a protest in Dublin, a Black Lives protest that only had 50 people at it, gets headline news, and then another protest that has a few thousand people at it isn't even mentioned in the news. So there are agendas here, and even the media here in Ireland is slavishly following what they see on CNN and on BBC. So because the BBC and CNN tend to dictate a lot of the global media, the agenda and the news flow, you know. So, so people are waking up, thank God, and therefore, hopefully over time we will get rid of the politicians who are very extreme. It's extreme, some of the stuff they're doing, you know, to these national lockdowns. It's crazy. What they should do is, if there is a cluster where there are a lot of deaths, not cases so much, because most people are asymptomatic, but where there are a lot of deaths, whether it be in a meat factory or whether it be in a certain village or town, they should go in there and do a lockdown, a very localized, specific lockdown. But you don't shut down the entire global economy. You know, you allow business to continue. You allow people who are strong and fit and healthy to go about their business, and you trust them to be personally responsible in terms of their loved ones and their elderly. You know, that they're not going to take risks with their parents or their grandparents, you know. There has to be a degree of personal responsibility in society. And we've had influenzas and pneumonia and bad viruses throughout our history, you know. Even the last 20 years has been bad viruses. And we know we should stay at home when we're sick. It's sort of common sense, you know. You don't have to lock people in their houses, shut down all the businesses and put masks on every single one's face. It's just absolutely crazy, you know. It really is. I mean,
it's absurd.
Laughable how crazy it is, you know.
Yeah, and it's so amazing that it's happening in your area of the world too. It's happening all around the world. Now, the big popular agenda is everybody wear a mask, everybody, you know, in every grocery store, you know, we're destroying businesses, as you mentioned. We're doing, you know, we're watching this in the United States, but from Dublin, I want everybody to understand you're seeing the exact same thing. And it's interesting that CNN is your top influencer in media. That's extraordinary.
Well, CNN and BBC, yeah, they would be globally, and they're dictating the pace, you know, and they're dictating the agenda, and because the rest of the media, they think CNN is liberal and, you know, American values, but as we know, CNN has lost its way over the years. You know, it's become very partisan, and basically it's just a mouthpiece for, you know, big corporations, whether it be, Bill Gates will be quite influential, obviously, but big tech people, you know, big liberal, all the data shows it's not as serious as they said to us. And the numbers that they said have not transpired. Numbers are way, way lower. And a lot of the deaths are actually due to the incompetence of the politicians and the bureaucrats who actually allow this virus to get into the nursing homes in our countries. If they had done their job and protected people in nursing homes, the mortality rate wouldn't even be as high as it is. And most of the data has shown that the mortality rate is less than 1%. And that's actually akin to what you would get in a bad flu or bad influenza. So don't get me wrong, I think it's a serious virus. We need to protect our elderly, protect people in nursing homes, protect vulnerable people. I'm not saying this is just a cold. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's serious. But the way to address it is to protect these people and boost their immune systems and to address the root cause of the problem, which is addressing our health. You know, I look at the US and I see a third of the population are obese and overweight. And then they wonder why people are getting sick. It's like, you had a health crisis before this even happened. No one's even talking about that. You know, it's like, you know, America is one of the most unhealthy nations the world has ever seen. Can we talk about that maybe rather than just focusing solely on the cases? And what's terrible as well is the cases, at this stage, we've had it for 6 months. They should have tested the entire population. If they really wanted it, they could have, if they had the will, and if it was as serious as they say it is, they could have tested the entire population. And then we would know that possibly most of us had this virus back in November, December, January, February, and the horse had bolted by the time they locked it down, you know, and we had herd immunity. But no one's talking about, that's the other thing, Sweden, no one's talking about Sweden. Sweden, they did no lockdown, and now the mortality rate is less than the US and less than the UK, where you have shut down your entire economies. They didn't shut down, they shut down a little further than nothing in Sweden. And this is a socialist country, you know, but their health experts took a different view, you know, and more health experts are speaking up and saying, hang on a second, you know, there's no such thing as zero COVID, you know, it's a virus. We have trillions of viruses in our bodies all the time. We can't get zero viruses, you know, that's who we are. We're made of viruses, you know, and we need to, the kids need to get these viruses and build their immune system. If we lock these kids up now, again, for months on end, it's actually very damaging, and we'll have a whole host of other health consequences that we're not even thinking about, you know.
It's so extraordinary that this is taking place all around the world. I think that's what, here in our country, we're kind of like, what are we doing? And it's the whole world, and it's the flu. And it's always been the flu, and to destroy the world's economy over it, and to, as you have just said, put people in positions. There are people that have clinical depression, that they've had it all their lives. And this puts them into a situation, you put somebody like that in a situation where they're losing their job and they can't talk to anyone and they can't visit anyone, and someone they love is dying and they can't visit. You put them into a suicidal state of mind. And that's why the suicides are rising. So the suicides are much higher than anyone dying of this virus.
No one's talking about it. It's disgusting.
No one says a word about that.
Yeah. Shocking. It really is.
It is so shocking. I want to go back to gold just for a moment, because you talked about the reset. You talked about the backing of the currencies with gold. And Mark, it's very interesting that in terms of gold, many of the countries that possess gold are saying certain numbers but have not been audited in so long that there's a real skepticism as to whether they even have the gold or not. And so I want you to touch base just on that point for a moment.
Yeah. Well, the US and the Federal Reserve, the gold, national gold reserves of the United States haven't been audited, I think, since 1950. So, you know, that's nearly 70 years, and a lot of people ask questions about that. And so allegedly, the government and the Federal Reserve claim that there is, I think it's 8,100, about 8,100 metric tons that you guys have stored, not in Fort Knox, not in where the Goldfinger movie was filmed. Everyone thinks it's out there in Kentucky in Fort Knox. It's actually stored in the New York Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve is obviously, it's not federal, and we're asking questions about the reserves, whether those reserves are there. So, because it's actually owned by the big Wall Street banks, the Federal Reserve, you know. So the New York Federal Reserve, the gold is stored there, down there in South Manhattan, and allegedly stored there. It has been over a long period of time. So I'd say they do have quite a bit of gold, but I would be amazed if they have 8,100 metric tons. A lot of people believe that a lot of gold has been sold into the marketplace over the years in order to suppress the gold price ultimately. And GATA, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, Chris Powell and Bill Murphy are two very brave men who've been, they've documented this. They've built up a huge amount of evidence over the years about the manipulation of gold. And so therefore that gold some of it has been sold in the marketplace, some of it has probably been lent in the marketplace. There's a lot of sort of gold lending and gold swaps that go on at an institutional level. So that's the New York Federal Reserve. And then, you know, the question is, do the ECB claim via the Bundesbank, the Bank of France, and the Bank of Italy, that they have roughly 10,000 metric tons between all the European central banks. I don't know if they do or not. I don't know when the last time they've been audited. They need to be audited, you know. The Germans have been bringing their gold back from America because they had some of their gold stored in New York, and they took it back because it shows the lack of trust for the US dollar. So they want to have their gold in country. And that there's been a big movement around the world for these big central banks to repatriate their gold back into their own country from the US and also from London, from the Bank of England, you know. So these countries realize that in a worst case scenario, they've actually said it in policy documents from the central banks themselves. You know, gold. Mario Draghi, the ex-head of the ECB, said gold is a reserve of safety. So that's from the top central banker, one of the top central banks in the world. Gold is a reserve of safety. I have to laugh when I see CNN and I see some of the media saying, "Oh, gold is not a safe haven at all. It's just a volatile commodity." It's like, sorry, the head of the ECB said it's a reserve of safety. And this was a man who was, the top central banker in Goldman Sachs, one of the biggest banks in the world. It's the media again and the agendas. And again, most of the time it's ignorance. I'm not bashing the media. It's a lack of awareness, lack of knowledge, and laziness. They need to inform themselves of facts, rather than calling people silly names, like gold bugs or maskers or anti-maskers or whatever name. It's like they call people names rather than actually engaging in a real debate like we used to do. It's rational human beings. But anyway, so the long story short is, that gold is not there. They don't own as much gold as they claim to have. And that's why a lot of people will be skeptical when they go to this research. And I think it makes the point that we always talk about people becoming sovereign, people becoming independent of the system and of the central banks, and everybody should repatriate some of their gold, and they should take delivery of gold if they feel comfortable in their own home. Become your own central bank, take delivery of gold in your own home. If you have to feel very secure in your own home before you do that, but we encourage all our clients to do that if they feel secure in their own home. And then diversify, have some stored in a location that's near to where you live in the United States, whether it has to be keep it out of the banks, don't put it into the safety deposit box of banks, because banks, there will probably almost certainly be bank holidays where banks are closed for a period of time, and you will not be able to access your box in the bank. So you have to have it always private, but always in very secure, long-established companies with either safety deposit box or vaults that are private outside the bank and accessible to where you live. And then if you are high net worth and you own that gold, you're taking delivery of some, you have some nearby that you can access in a worst case scenario. You should also consider having some stored either in Switzerland or Singapore, to the safest financially, by retail investors, high net worth investors, ultra high net worth investors. That's where they're storing it, mostly in Switzerland, in Zurich, in the eastern part of Switzerland. It's a much more conservative place, eastern Switzerland, German-speaking Switzerland, and Singapore as well. These are two large creditor nations that still believe, to a degree in free markets, but they do believe in property and allowing people to own property. And we believe that they are two places where you're unlikely to see a confiscation of precious metals. And obviously there has been a confiscation of precious metals in the past in the US in 1933. So it's important to be aware of that precedent. I just one last thing, that I don't think that they're going to do a confiscation of people's gold on a personal level, even in the United States, because so few people in the US and indeed the Western world actually own physical gold. But what they will probably do is they'll nationalize wherever there are large pools of gold in large vaults, whether it be COMEX vaults, LBMA gold vaults around the world. They are susceptible to confiscation. The exchange, like the ETF gold exchange from gold and the COMEX vaults, that could be confiscated. You need to avoid that sort of digital gold, paper gold, and you need to own the actual underlying physical asset, the underlying coin parts, and have to be in your name, fully allocated and fully segregated. It's no good having it via some in online company where you get an online statement saying you own X amount of gold. You actually have to have legal title to that gold, and that means that even in worst case scenarios where you can't contact the website of the dealer who sold it to you, you cannot get them on the phone. If you have that outright legal ownership, then you can actually go to Switzerland or Singapore, or you can contact the vault directly in Zurich or Singapore, and you can get that gold shipped to America, or shipped to wherever you want to ship it in the world, to Mexico or to Canada, or and that's the beauty of gold. It's portable, and you can take delivery of it, and you can move it and have it on your person, and that's what it's for. Worst case scenarios. And again, I'm not Armageddonist. I don't think there's a possibility we will get into some worst case scenarios like that, but I hope that common sense prevails and we return to some form of sanity, economic and political sanity in the coming months.
Yeah, you used a great term that we should repatriate our own gold, meaning individually, right?
Yeah.
And
absolutely, and become sovereign. It's, talk about sovereign bonds, so it means you are sovereign as an individual and as a family. You're not dependent on the banks and on the financial system and indeed on the central banks, and on the politicians who we have today, many of whom, are not very trustworthy, shall we say? Yeah.
They really aren't. They really aren't. And I mean, truthfully, if someone should get it in their head, some governor. I'm not saying that the governors have the right to confiscate all the gold across the state. I have no idea if that's a legitimate thing, but it's an example of what's happening right now. People just making these decisions that are arbitrary, whether they have the right to do it or not. And then everybody gets together and kind of, you know what, Mark? They're fake virtue signaling is what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. And if you don't do that, it's almost like you're stigmatized, or it's you're bad, you're a bad person, and you don't care for people, and it's not going to be far from the truth, And there's actually, when you talk to people freely, I think more and more in recent days, I'm talking to people, and more people they're beginning to ask questions, and because I think the mask thing has become so extreme, and mandating masks and not just in public places, but now in outdoor areas, and even when you're not near people, the whole thing was about social distancing. But if you're already distant from people, as you said, if you're in a car, why do you have to wear a mask? It's become, people are realizing that there's something else going on here. A lot of the rules don't, and the guidelines, and that don't make any sense whatsoever. There's so many of them that just don't make any sense. That people are beginning to rebel, and I think it's a healthy thing. We need a bit of civil disobedience, and we need to be able to have a debate as well. I think people are getting frustrated because they're saying, "Hang on a second, no one is voicing my opinion here." Am I crazy? And then they talk to their friends, they go, "No, you're not crazy. I share those concerns." Maybe we're not to the same degree, but there's a lot of concern about it, and we need to have debate as nations and as a society, because otherwise we will end up in some crazy Saudi Arabia dystopian sort of place where we all go around with burqas all the time, and can you imagine now? We're going to have colds and flus and unusual viruses go around in November, December, January.
We always have.
The immune systems are going to be much weaker now. Because the masks, they're not getting oxygen into their bloodstream. And there's all the bacteria in the masks. I mean, many surgeons themselves, people who wear masks are the surgeons who are doing operations. And they wear masks because they're operating on someone, they're slicing someone open, and they're doing an operation. And they're scared that if they don't have the mask and suddenly they sneeze or cough, they could infect that person. But you don't see doctors in hospitals or nurses in hospitals wearing masks, where there's lots of disease every single day of the week. People don't wear masks in hospitals. But now the entire society has to wear masks. It doesn't make sense at all. But the society one's going to make theirs. You can imagine the winter when we do have flus and virus and all the rest. When people are wearing the same mask day in, day out, how unhealthy is that? If you want to wear a mask, you should actually be disposing of that mask and wearing 4 or 5 masks every single day if you want to really be effective at it, Or you need to be wearing something and cleaning it at least once a day, and maybe 2 or 3 times a day if you're not wearing a disposable one, So, but you can't even have a debate at that, because it's all about control, and I think it's also about they've overplayed their hand. They've, as you said, overstated the severity of the virus, and now they're trying to maintain that narrative. They don't want to admit they got it absolutely wrong, because if they admit they got it wrong, then they will be in big, big trouble, because the public will say, well, hang on a second, you shut down the entire economy. I lost my job. I lost my business. My family members committed suicide. People died because of what you did. So they don't want to admit that. So they're maintaining the narrative. They're actually doubling down in some ways, So, but thank God people are beginning to wake up. And we have independent media and YouTube and other channels. And so we can still converse about these things, thank God, So let's talk about it while we still can before these platforms potentially get shut down as well.
And we've got to be able to have these conversations. And you're right when you just said something earlier. This is insane. It makes no logical sense. And I don't know why logic has gone out the window of everybody's brain just so that they can listen to some individual like Bill Gates who's talked about depopulation before, who's talked about that there's billions and billions to be made from vaccines.
And who is responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands, of women in India and in Asia. I think the number is like over 400,000. It's shocking.
And that's
And
kept
that's a
away,
fact.
John.
That's a fact that's in the news, has been reported, and the Indian government has actually validated it. But you can't even talk about that. And if you say about Bill Gates, you're a conspiracy theorist. Bill Gates he's about profit. He's about money. He's a bit of a psychopath from my perspective, because that's all he cares about is money. Money is his only god. He doesn't care about the people who are dying of COVID. I mean, let's be realistic, because even when you see him in the interviews, he's actually smiling and laughing. It's shocking when you see that man being interviewed. The lack of sincerity, the lack of compassion, he oozes insincerity, and he's about money and power. People are scared to look at the facts because there's so much fear, and fear actually makes people, they shut down certain parts of the brain, and they're less rational, basically. And that's what's happening right now, because they are very fearful. And it's understandable, because the media is just, you turn on the news in the morning and it's like the cases are going up, and we have to shut down the schools, and we have to shut down the economy, and it's cognitive dissonance as well, because the real risk is actually the economic collapse that's going to come down in the coming weeks and months. That's the real fear. And I think that's at the back of their mind. They realize, how come we're not talking about this? How come the media isn't talking about that? So they then think, well, if the media is talking about the cases, the media is very rational, and these are experts and, excellent journalists and editors, and these guys know. So therefore, the real risk must be the COVID, not the economic collapse. But it's not. The real risk is the economic collapse, and all the stuff we've talked about here in terms of the ramifications for our companies people are not talking about,
Right. I want to switch gears just a little bit to what you see coming economically. I mean, I know that you've saw a crisis building because of the printing of the money and the so on and so forth. But now the situation that we're in, the dynamics of it have changed. So what do you see? What do you foresee economically speaking for the world?
Like depression, unfortunately, and I hate that word because it's so depressing. And, I'm an optimist by nature, and we'll come through this. I genuinely do believe that, but unfortunately, I do think basically a depression is a very, very severe recession for a long period of time, and we saw that obviously in the 1930s. So with a massive economic contraction, it's already happened, and it's happening as we speak. But the media isn't telling us this, and that's what I find bizarre. That the same people, they trust the media about this COVID thing, and meanwhile the same media is telling that we're having an economic recovery. It's like, on what planet is there an economic recovery? Because most Western nations, you look at most of the data, there's mild recoveries from this heart attack. We fell off a cliff, and then you see this little bounce back, but that's not an economic recovery, and nor is it sustainable in any way. So the bottom line is we're going to have a depression, unfortunately, an economic depression, and the question is it deflationary or stagflationary or hyperinflationary? And it's hard to know because there's so many variables, and most likely all roads lead, there's no doubt about it, all roads lead to inflation, stagflation, hyperinflation in the medium and long term. In the short term, we could see deflation because the scale of the debt is so huge in the world. So we're seeing property prices around the world fall. Not so much, I'm surprised they haven't fallen more, but New York has seen quite significant falls. Some markets around the world have seen significant falls. So I think given the scale of the debt, the economy has had a heart attack. People have lost their jobs. Their income is falling. So the yield on property, residential or commercial or offices, is going to fall. It's going to fall massively, and therefore prices are going to fall. And that property price, when they start to fall, momentum is a powerful thing. And I think given what we'll see in the world, you're going to see property crashes around the world. So you could see quite a bit of deflation, and that could come into the stock market, because all these assets, we have a global asset bubble, the so-called everything bubble. So I think you're going to see significant deflation in assets, but I think we're going to see inflation taking off in the essentials of life, so food, water, education, stuff that we need. I think is going to go up in value quite significantly, because the supply chains are going to be disrupted. The cost to do business is, people aren't talking about this or thinking about this, that for most businesses, to produce some of these things in a social distancing thing, you need a bigger factory or a bigger warehouse, in order to have those staff in there. I was in the barbers the other day, the hairdressers, and they had moved shop because they needed a much bigger space in the hairdressers, because they have to have every single person 2 meters or 3 meters away from the other person, So that's an added cost for a lot of businesses that they, particularly restaurants and hotels, but even in manufacturing and that people will have to be further away from each other in certain facilities, and therefore there will be more costs, and that's just one aspect of the breakdown of supply chain that's going to contribute to inflation. But the bottom line is that people are going to lose faith in currencies as well, and therefore they're going to start. I think the velocity of money, that's when the inflation kicks off, is when it's not the money supply going up per se, it's people beginning to spend the money and to get rid of the money as soon as they get it, because they realize this is not going to have value, So they start buying things, they start hoarding things, not hoarding toilet paper or stupid face masks, but of hoarding, food that will help us, and hopefully they'll be hoarding oranges and grapefruits and vitamin C and water and vitamins and minerals, and I think vitamin D. When we don't have sun in the northern hemisphere, they should have good stocks of vitamin D. That will be something. So that's what they should be hoarding. But anyway, they will start hoarding these things, because they realize that inflation is coming, and they'll realize that we're going to have an economic depression. That penny hasn't dropped yet. Only the so-called gold books and these doom and gloom merchants have sort of realized this, and they've been planning for this for years, but it's coming in a way that none of us had expected.
Now, when you say that, what kind of timing do you expect? And please paint the picture of what you see.
As ever, the timing it's very difficult to know, because again, it's very difficult. The politicians in the world can impact these things, but I think it's my sense of it's in the coming weeks and in the coming quarter. 2 quarters. I could be wrong, and I have to admit I have been wrong in the past. I thought, given the scale of the debt in the world, that we would have a recession, 2, 3, 4 years ago. But they've managed to keep that can down the road, but we've come to the end of the road. There's no doubt about it. So it's hard to know. I mean, I think we're actually in the early stages of a depression as we speak. And so then the question becomes, one of the big, one of the bigger indicators, bellwethers, if you will. The gold price is a good bellwether, and it's a good barometer of risk, and the gold price has been going up very significantly, and it's up 25-30% this year in dollar terms. It's up in all currencies, and that is a sign that there is more risk in the world, and that people in the world are becoming more concerned about their currencies. But the other big bellwether is the S&P 500, and the S&P 500 particularly, but also the Dow Jones index to an extent, and the Nasdaq to an extent as well. And as long as the prices of those indexes keep going higher and higher, as they have been doing, then I think that creates a false sense of security, that people think, oh, things can't be too bad. Look, the stock market's going up. They don't realize that, stock markets can be manipulated as well by whether it be algorithms or by the plunge protection team and the working group of financial markets, who may be active in their buying the S&P futures in order to, at certain key moments, say at the opening of the stock market, at the start of the day, or indeed at the last 10-15 minutes of the day, you see these peculiar rallies in the stock market just as it begins to close. So these markets can be manipulated as well, and they have been manipulated. So I think it's a false bellwether. But I think what happens in the stock market is quite important, because I think a lot of even investors take signal from it, and even proper investors take signal from it. And if they hear that stocks are doing really well, then that gives them an appetite for risk, and they say, oh, well, we could do okay. Look, the S&P is at record highs and stocks. But the S&P being record highs, it's based actually on a few tech stocks primarily. It's based on your FANG stocks and your Facebook and your Apple and your Netflix and your Google and your Amazon. So it's and their capitalization is so huge now that's artificially creating the S&P 500's record highs. So anyway, if we get a stock market crash before President Trump's election in October, which is quite possible, because there's a lot of vested interests, including Wall Street, who are very against Trump, obviously. So if you get a stock market crash, then that's your signal. We're going into it, and it's going to kick off a big way. If we don't, and it gets into if he doesn't get reelected, I think we probably will have a stock market crash with Biden. Because he's more center left leaning, and he will not be good for the economy. So that what happens to the stock market in the coming quarter, actually, I think is very important. It's not just about Trump versus Biden, the Republican Democrat thing. What's above all that is obviously the Federal Reserve and the central bank and the central banks globally. And if they keep printing the money, if they print enough money, and they're not printing it, obviously, they just electronically, they go on the keyboard and they press Control P 1 0 0 0 0 0 0 0 0 12 zeros, and they've created a trillion. And then they decide, right, let's push that out into the banks. It's not going into the economy. The people aren't getting it, obviously, but it's supporting the asset prices again. And they're now buying junk bonds. They're buying stocks. It's crazy stuff. They used to use it to buy US bonds and European bonds, to support the government debt market. Now they're using it to buy buy stocks, to buy ETFs, to buy junk bonds. This is what they're doing with our money. They're creating our money, our currency, and they're buying assets to support the markets. But anyway, so that's the most important point, that the central banks themselves, if they decide that they want to push the stock market higher, they can create enough money to push the market higher. So it's not, the political thing is a bit of a sideshow in many ways. It's ancient GP.
Mm. Now, in terms of Goldcore, I'd like you to talk about your company a little bit so that everybody understands what you do, and then everyone can contact you and watch you when they start to build their own protection against anything that's possible in the future.
Yeah. So, we basically specialize in allowing people to own gold and silver coins and bars in the safest way possible. So that's either delivery to your house or your place of work, or indeed storage in the safest vaults in the world, in the safest jurisdictions in the world. And we allow people to own gold. It's both fully allocated and fully segregated. That means that your gold is not commingled with all the other clients' gold on a big shelf or a few shelves. Your gold is actual individual coins and bars are separate from all the other investors, and it's separate both from a physical point of view. It's separate and segregated, but it's also separate from an auditing point of view, which is very important indeed. So you can, when you buy gold from us, and you can obviously take delivery of some of the gold and silver. We encourage people to do that if you feel very safe going home. But if you actually buy gold for us for storage, you will get the trade confirmations of the coins and bars you bought. You'll get the asset statement of the gold and silver coins and bars that you own, stored with our vault partners, which is Loomis in Zurich and Brinks in Singapore, and these are two of the biggest cash handling and gold storage providers in the world. So, but what's important and what we do, which is unique, is you will actually get an asset statement, not just from us, but also from the vault provider. You can actually log on to the vault provider's website, and you can get your own review of the assets that you own. So you have your name, you'll have your account number, and that means that keeps us honest, because we could say, oh yeah, you have the gold, but there have been instances of gold dealers and gold brokers and indeed banks selling more gold than they actually have, and they might sell the same 100 gold bars to another client, and so this keeps everybody honest, whereby you can, in terms of audit, it's that transparency, whereby you can log on to the vault provider's website and you could see that, yes, I own these assets. And it also means that in a worst case scenario, say something happened here, our head office is in Dublin and Ireland, say something happened to the electricity grid or happened to the Wi-Fi, and you could contact our office, you couldn't get us on the phones, you couldn't get us on the website for a period of time. The beauty of this is you can go directly to the vault provider and you can say, well, I haven't been able to get in contact with Goldcore. I have XYZ gold. You have the evidence that I have XYZ gold. I want to move that gold to America. I want to ship it to California or wherever it is. Or indeed, I want to move it to XYZ provider in your vault. And they'll move it within the vault to another gold broker, and there's gold brokers all around the world who store these vaults. And then you can sell your gold and silver to a third-party broker. So we set up in a way whereby these people are just protected against the worst case scenarios, including worst case scenarios to our company, And what's important about that is gold is a safe haven asset, but it's only a safe haven if you own it in the safest way. It has to be liquid. You have to be able to either take delivery of it and sell it near where you live, or use it to buy goods or services or assets or land or a farm or whatever you want to buy with your gold, or you have to be able to sell it and to get cash back. So there's no point having gold. As I said, the digital gold, there's a lot of crypto gold and, the crypto blockchain gold. And, I'm a big believer in blockchain and less so in cryptocurrencies. I think Bitcoin is very interesting. It should do well, but there's no guarantees that binary, it goes to zero or goes to, hundreds of thousands, or it goes to zero, unlike gold, which is a proven store of value. But anyway, yeah, so blockchain gold, crypto gold, all that digital gold is very risky, much more risky than people realize, as is paper gold, as is ETF gold. If you're going to own gold, given what's happening in the world and the nature of the conversation we've had today and the scale of the political, geopolitical, and monetary risk you have to face, it's absolutely unprecedented in history. So, people say, oh, gold prices are high. I hear people saying that. And I was on Bloomberg recently and they said, oh, they actually suggested gold was a bubble. And I was just shocked. They were actually editorializing and trying to convince people that gold was a bubble. And I was like, hang on a second. I didn't say hang on a second, but in my head I was like, how can you say that? If you adjust for inflation, it's well below the place it was in 1980. And that's even using the bogus government inflation, CPI price index, which is completely bogus. There's a lot of statisticians who have looked at the CPI and said that if you actually calculate inflation, the way they calculate inflation in the 1980s, we have much higher inflation they're letting on today. They've done all sorts of hedonic adjustments, which greatly underestimates the scale of inflation that we're seeing in recent years, because the government is trying to tell us that inflation is 1 or 2%, but meanwhile the rents have gone up 15-20% per annum, the cost of living, insurance gone up, healthcare gone up, the price of everything's going up. The only thing that's gone down in value is people's iPhones and some consumer gadgets, but food, the price of putting fuel into your car hasn't gone down, so the cost of living has gone up very seriously, but the government has convinced the masses that it hasn't, and it's just shocking how they got away with that. But anyway, that's another thing the media could, hopefully one of these days, they might decide to do a bit of journalism. Journalism would be good. Yeah. There's a thought. Let's do some research and get some data, and rather than just slavishly following what some other journalist said or what Fauci says. Anyway, let's not go back there again. I've had my rant on that, and thank you. It's a good therapy for me today, Michelle.
Yes. And it's so great for everyone to know your company's out there, to realize what's happening in the world, to have these conversations with actual bullion dealers. You're not just dealing with gold, but you have to also know what's happening in the world. It's because of your business itself. And for everyone to know how to have access to you, it is so amazing to have you on this show every time, Mark. Please tell everyone how they can contact your company and how they can follow you.
Yeah. So we're on all the usual channels on Twitter, at Goldcore, at Mark T. O'Byrne, Mark Thomas O'Byrne, on Facebook, on YouTube. We've got a big following on YouTube. We're putting this video up there as well. And our website is goldcore.com, goldcore.com, and you can subscribe to a very popular daily update we do, a weekly update, monthly update, and indeed the podcasts we do as well, which are quite widely followed. So goldcore.com, and if you've any questions at all, just shoot us over an email, info@goldcore.com, and and we endeavour to. We're all about education, so we're kind of trying to help people, and make a healthy and a fair profit at the same time, and that's a win-win for everybody.
Right. And just to emphasize to everyone, Mark has dealt with over $1 billion worth of investment funds. He's an absolute expert in precious metals. He's one of the top in the world. And just because he's incredibly polite, humble, soft-spoken, this is the man you really need to go to get some information and to at least
you're
start.
Too kind, Michelle.
Right.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
People
underestimate your extraordinary power in the world simply because of your very kind demeanor. But once people realize who they're dealing with, they're in very good hands with you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on this show today.
Pleasure. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Mr. Mark O'Byrne, founder and research director of goldcore.com. For the Industry Experts Panel, I'm Michelle Holliday at PortfolioWealthGlobal.com.